Okay, so basically this was the event that they were advertising. So you're saying there were a lot of students there. And what were you saying? There's some kind of an incentive by the university to put on events like this?
Yeah, so it's called experience points that the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences does. So students can come, they can win gift certificates to places like Jamba Juice, Milk and Cookies, and BYU ice cream. And there's also a bigger prize each semester. They give out $1,000 to the BYU Tech Store each semester. So students, obviously, that's a great incentive for students to come to these events and rack up points.
I see. All right. So the university is really pushing this. And well, I'm curious. So I know we'd queued up some clips, I believe, about some of the stuff that was said in that or during this address, and I figured we could kind of go through some of those and listen to them and react and discuss them a little bit. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So here is the first clip we're going to listen to.
Let me begin with this. I want to do two framing issues. First of all, it's the concept of iniquity. Iniquity. It's a very interesting word. It is mentioned, to my count, about 111 times in the Book of Mormon. Far more than abomination, far more than wickedness. It is the one concept in terms of wrong behavior, of injurious behavior that is mentioned the most. Here's one I want to share with you about that. Thank you. Did you get that to work? Thank you. This one. There we go. All right. So this is from the Oxford English Dictionaries. We begin to understand iniquity. I am a believer that no words are by accident in our sacred scripture, particularly modern scripture. No words are by accident. All of them are quite intentional. In the modern world, we Americans tend to see terms like abomination, wickedness, iniquity as all synonyms of sin. I want to suggest to you that they are actually addressing different kinds of wrong behavior. So this is from the Oxford English Dictionary, as I mentioned before, iniquity. Of course, this is the term that we're familiar with, the definition we're familiar with, the quality of being unrighteous, or more often, unrighteous action or conduct. This is the piece that interests me. There we go. Sometimes, especially in early use, wrongful or injurious action towards another, infliction of wrong, injury. There we go, I think that's it. In modern use, generally connoting gross injustice or public wrong, inequity. Inequity. In fact, the term iniquity comes from the Latin term inequus, which means unequal or unjust. So when you see that term, and as you study the Book of Mormon, I want you to think, is it referring, or what ways is it referring to unjust behavior, unjust action? So that's the first framing concept I want to share with you.
So what are your guys' initial thoughts on that? I have quite a few, but I'll let you guys go first.
I find it first a little interesting, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I find it interesting that he makes sure to note that it's mentioned more than wickedness and abomination. It's almost like I felt like in that sense he was maybe setting the stage to define iniquity as he will end up defining it. That is not in reference to wickedness or abomination. So I find that somewhat interesting. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I remember sitting in the lecture and just thinking, where is he going with this? Where could he possibly be going with this? And just this emphasis on iniquity and like a part of what iniquity means. Like most of what he is saying is true, but he's missing the other part. Like Jacob was saying, he's totally ignoring that wickedness and abomination and sin and all these other words are also part of what iniquity means. And he goes straight to this idea of more of inequity and continues to talk about that.
Yeah, and anyone who's ever seen a dictionary will see that they have, a list of possible sort of ways the word can be used. And he sounds like he's using a modern dictionary and he's going through, and it's all the standard stuff. And it's like, oh, at the very end of the bottom definition after a comma, it may refer to inequality or inequity in modern English. Okay, here's my issue with that. I'm going to pull this up real quick on the screen. Okay, first of all, language changes with time. It's been a long time since the Book of Mormon actually was released, linguistically speaking, and words change. That's why there is, if people go online, I generally recommend that people go to the 1828 American Dictionary so you can see in Joseph Smith's time, what did the word iniquity means? And it says, injustice, unrighteousness, a deviation from rectitude, a want of rectitude, righteousness, or in principle, a malicious, a particular deviation from rectitude, sin or crime, wickedness, any act of injustice. And then under 4, original want of holiness or depravity. Notice nowhere in the 1828 dictionary, which would have been the standard parlance of Joseph Smith's time, and the people who read the Book of Mormon and that he was translating it for, never would have understood iniquity to mean inequity. So, but we do have people these days who are really big on the concept of inequity being the big problem. And anyway, I guess my question for you guys is, why do you think he's using that language? Why is he trying to do this? Why is he trying to alter the concept of iniquity, which is referring essentially to wickedness, to try and create a new category of inequity?
So being at that lecture, I feel like he came into this. This is what his interpretation of the Book of Mormon is, right? He's reading the Book of Mormon with this idea that there are inequities in our day, and we need to be trying to resolve that. He's kind of going into it and seeing what the Book of Mormon prophets are saying with that lens. And when he's doing that, he's ignoring quite a bit of what is actually there and just pulling out these little bits and pieces that actually promote his narrative and his way of thinking.
And I don't know much about Dr. Pagan's literature or what he specializes in, but one can assume that his definition of inequality or inequity or injustice isn't what was being referenced to in the Book of Mormon or in Latter-day Scripture, but perhaps is a modern social science, social justice definition of inequity and injustice.
Absolutely. And I think that that's what I would say as well. I mean, there is no doubt that in academia today, there is a particular ideological bent to it. And there is a particular view of social justice and critical theory that it permeates departments of history, the humanities departments are just rife with it. And so the fact that he's bringing it here, it's just like, to me, it's just obvious. Anyone who's been paying attention knows exactly what he's doing. He's coming in and he's looking at the scriptures and he's wresting the scriptures. That's to twist them, to conform them, as you said, to fit a particular narrative that isn't in the scriptures, but that's in his head. And so instead of seeing what the scripture is saying, letting the scripture speak to him and then to the audience, here he is in front of BYU students giving his take on what the scriptures say based on the lens that he brings to the text, instead of letting the text speak as it was meant to be spoken according to the translator Joseph Smith, who in the 1820s is using the language of that day, which, as we already referenced, has nothing to do with inequity. Okay, so yeah, it's bad. Anyway, any other thoughts before we go into the second clip here on this subject of his redefinition?
Let's get into it.
All right, let's move on to the next clip here.
And Mormon then jumps into the narrative and he offers his commentary. And this is why I want to highlight this to you. He says this is his observations. He looks back over this history. Now this great loss of the Nephites and the great slaughter which was among them would not have happened. It's a very definitive thing to say. This would not have happened had it not been for their wickedness and their abomination which was among them. Yea, and it was among those also who professed to belong to the church of God. It was among the saints that lived then there in that time as well. They were also guilty. And it was because of the pride of their hearts, yes, because of their exceeding riches. It was because of their oppression to the poor, withholding their food from the hungry, withholding their clothing from the naked, and smiting their humble brethren upon the cheek, making a mock of that which was sacred, denying the spirit of prophecy and revelation. And he goes on. And because of their iniquity, remember their inequality, the judgments of God did stare them in the face. Interesting commentary from Mormon, who lived long after this time, but could look upon what happened, the loss of Zarahemla, the sack of Zarahemla, the slaughter that happened, and he jumps in and he says they would not have lost if they were unified, if they had taken care of one another and built bridges and helped one another, right? So to this question, why did the unified nation fail? This is one of the messages that I find in the Book of Mormon. It's that the practice of concentrating wealth and privilege and limiting leadership frustrated, it undermined national unity. You see, it operated almost like an oligarchy, perhaps even an aristocracy, from my reading, what I can tell. They never seemed able to bridge the divide between languages, cultures, traditions, and the structural inequalities between the wealthy and the powerful and dispossessed, led to resentment, rebellion, and defections. Now, this is what I find interesting. 112 times, the Book of Mormon repeatedly warns of inequality. The point that I want to make here was that Mormon, as a historian, was not writing to a population that existed in his day. He knew that this record that he was compiling would never be read by anyone in his day, perhaps his son, of course, but by and large, it was unlike the work that Professor Ken and I do, where we do know that there's an audience that will read our works. This is written for a latter day. This is written for our time. Why does he remind us so many times about the dangers of inequality, of inequity, of injustice?
I think I know why. I think it's because it's not there and you're inventing it through the lens that you're bringing to the text. Now, obviously, I think we can all agree that the Book of Mormon it does speak out against pride and people that will use their status over other people. That's there. But he goes into a lot more than that. What is your guys' take on his view of these scriptures and of the Book of Mormon's message?
Jacob, I actually agree with him. The Book of Mormon really was written for our day. I do agree with that. And it's so interesting to see how he approaches this part of the text. So he starts in Helaman 4, verse 11, and he reads all the way down, and he says, this would not have happened if it had not been for their wickedness and their abomination. And then he continues into 12, and he talks about the pride of their hearts and not giving their food to the hungry, not giving clothing to the naked. And he goes all the way down, kind of rushes over really quickly, making a mock of that which was sacred, denying the spirit of prophecy and of revelation, and cuts that off at that part and goes all the way down to verse, I think, 23.
Wait. So he cut off, what part did he cut off? Could you read that? Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, so he cut off the latter half of verse 12. So he goes to this part where it says, making a mock of that which was sacred, denying the spirit of prophecy and of revelation. And he cuts off here. He failed to mention murdering, plundering, lying, stealing, committing adultery, rising up in great contentions, and deserting away into the land of Nephi among the Lamanites. He misses that latter portion of the scripture, which in fact is related to verse 11, which talks about the wickedness and the abominations of the people. And so the audience at that point did not even have the scripture in front of him and didn't know that he had skipped over that part. And where does he skip to? He goes down to verse 23. And he starts off verse 23. And because of their iniquity, the church had begun to dwindle. Yet, for those who heard, what did he do? He switched out iniquity with inequity. And it's just blatant deception. It's sad. It's so sad.
Yeah, that is. I mean, you're just taking the scriptures and you're just manipulating it to exactly what you want it to say. You're even changing the meanings of words. And then you're using modern correlations to it. I actually recently did a whole series on my channel, a whole bunch of different videos on the manipulation of language and how that is happening. This is a case study in it, where people will take a word like iniquity and change it to mean inequity in social Marxist terms. Like, what are you talking about? That is not what it means. And so, as you're seeing here, he's just manipulating the text to fit a particular agenda. Any other thoughts on that? I have a couple other things, but I wanted to see if you guys have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, just one more thought. This is especially dangerous at BYU because, I mean, to take the scriptures, this is something that all of us have read many times. This is something that we study every day, right? And it's a significant part of our religion. And then he comes in and he presents this foreign and nonsensical understanding, this foreign view of our scriptures that we are studying every day. And he passes it off onto us out of context. He's misplacing different word meanings. There's so much deception in here. And somehow he's allowed to do this at BYU. And this is something that really needs to be stopped.
And Jacob, you know this, you've talked about critical theory and Marxism, and it's really toxic because these words do have an effect on you. I know for a certainty, and it's happened to me too. After I go to a lecture like this or hear a professor talk about something like this, and they switch the use of terms, when I read the Book of Mormon, every time I see iniquity, I'm going to think inequity because of Dr. Pagan. And all those students who are at this lecture, who were there with good intentions and may not know better, are going to think the same thing. That's the danger of this presentation, this type of approach that he's taking.
If you'd like to see the full episode, please see the link in the video description. So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.